Third World War, rule segment number 6. Here I want to talk about some of the rule changes. This gaming system was developed over 30 years in 5 separate components that were brought together, which is Central Europe, Scandinavia, the Balkans, West Asia, Persian Gulf, and the Middle East. So the consolidated rules, all the specialized rules for the different regions are contained in the consolidated rules, which are posted. So you need to consult those. Obviously, you're going to focus on the ones that affect you, the ones that affect your particular region. But there are 8 generic rules that are rules changes that I've implemented. And these are different from the rules that are in the rule book. So you should read these first and have them solidly in your consciousness before you assimilate the information in the rule book. The first, any unit that's isolated because it can't trace a supply line back to its supply source is considered out of supply. Okay, that's different from the rules where it simply loses one level of proficiency. These units are their power is cut in half. They have half firepower in the attack. Poland, Czechoslovakia, and Hungary, if the cities in those countries are not garrisoned by a minimum of 3 Soviet divisions, then when these states become shaken, which is indicated by how many brigades they lost in combat, then they're going to revolt. And NATO will gain control of their land units. These countries' air units will be eliminated, and partisans will emerge in these countries. In other words, they'll interfere. This is a problem for the Soviets. The Soviets absolutely have to have reserve units to garrison Poland. Because if Poland revolts, the Soviet Union is going to have to trace its supplies through Czechoslovakia and Hungary. And if all those countries revolt, then the Soviet army in Europe is going to be out of supply, which would be catastrophic. Rule number 3, the original rules required us to calculate the complexity of the average proficiency of a stack. That's absurd. What we do now is indicate a lead unit. The lead unit can have whatever proficiency, but if losses are taken in combat, whether that unit's proficiency is high or low, all the units in that attacking stack with that proficiency have to take the losses first. And the same applies to the defender. So, sometimes you want to have a lot of bad units led by a good unit, and you get the good unit's proficiency, but the good unit's going to suffer the initial losses. And so those higher proficiency units may die first if you stick them out in front. Rule number 4, the Soviet East German commander and the Western NATO commander will decide on nuclear escalation. Nuclear weapons, number 5, will be used on a first-come, first-served basis. I've got a list of them. If you want one, yell it out. Number 6, there are no Soviet breakdowns. In other words, we can't take a Soviet division and break it down into brigades, as was possible in an earlier version in the Arctic. It's just too complex. Number 7, in a turn where there's maximum escalation, the number of cities destroyed is not 1, but it'll be 1d6. In other words, you're looking at operational use of strategic nuclear weapons will blow up cities. And finally, rule number 8, the Soviet Reserve 19th Army will be deployed in the Northern Theater, and it's this which is going to activate Sweden preliminarily. Now, there are additional rules that I'm not going to go too far into the rules, but just to let you know, these are rules that you should be aware of. The Soviets are able to redeploy units that they take off the map on a Soviet border, and they can move it to any other front. Now, there's no single unified leader for either side, so the Soviet front leaders will have to talk to each other to arrange this. NATO oceanic movement is very similar. So NATO can take a unit from Norway, say, and they can deploy it to the Persian Gulf, but it'll take a while. There are rules for amphibious operations and in what regions they can be conducted, but they're fairly simple. You take a unit from a port or that comes in as a reinforcement that turn, and you can deploy it on an empty hex if you're Soviet, or you can actually conduct an assault on a hex if you're a Western country and you've got the U.S. Marines or the British Marines. Turkish Straits and Suez Canal are sort of important. You have to capture all of the hexes through the Dardanelles in order to exit the Soviet fleet from the Black Sea into the Aegean. And if you do, the Soviets can then conduct amphibious operations in the Aegean, which can give them some advantage in a fight against Greece or Turkey. One-hex islands on the map are treated as ports. The F-14 American aircraft, which operates in the Mediterranean and the Indian Ocean, actually are abstractions of carrier air forces, and every turn they have to be rolled to see whether they stay. Some units have territorial units, which are basically reserves. They have a T on the unit. These units may not leave their country. They can, for obvious reasons, they don't have the logistic support to leave their country. Some countries are rivals and cannot fight together. Israel is a rival with just about every other frontline Arab state. Greece and Turkey are also rivals. They cannot stack together. They cannot combine and attack together against another target. This game presumes that there's vast quantities of chemical weapons that are deployed, and there's a disruption that's suffered by a unit in addition to its normal losses if it doesn't have chemical warfare capability, and that's listed on the country chart. There are Yugoslav partisans, Finnish partisans. There's rules for mobilization of Swedish reserves. Romania has a 1 in 3 chance of defecting to NATO if it's shaken, and another 1 in 3 chance of surrender if it's demoralized while it's a Soviet ally. And its aircraft will go to NATO. They won't be destroyed as they would be with Hungary, Czechoslovakia, and Poland. The Israelis have a severe logistic limit, which is after the third turn, the Israelis can no longer regroup, essentially because they're cut off from world trade and they're relying on their indigenous capabilities. The Kurds, there are special rules regarding the Kurds and who controls the Kurds. There are Iranian dissident groups, including the Iranian Mujahideen, which is controlled by the US, and the Iranian Tudeh Party and the Iranian Communists are controlled by the Soviets. The Afghan Mujahideen interfere with logistics in Afghanistan as if they were partisans. And again, in the country chart, you have a list of numbers for countries that how many brigades they've lost to become shaken, how many brigades to be demoralized, and the conditions for those countries surrendering.